I don't think we really grasp, the meaning of life and how precious life is. I just remember going out for my first walk when I was at home and just loving everything, like loving the trees, loving just looking at everything around me and feeling so lucky to be there. It was the most beautiful thing. It's so beautiful that I feel crying when you think about it. It was warm and I wanted to go so badly into there. I so badly wanted to go in there, and all I could think of in my head was home. So I'm Angelina Leigh. I am a retired actress and model, and I'm holding my dog for a little bit.
No problem. Welcome to the show, Angelina. Angelina's going to talk a little bit about her NDE experience. She's had a couple of NDEs, and we'll just go wherever it leads. And I don't know if she's going to talk about both of them or one of them in particular, but we'll see where it goes. Thanks for coming on the show, Angelina. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And I think it's really cool that you actually, when I saw the question on Facebook, and I was like, oh my God, I have. And I'm surprised more people haven't. Like, I know a couple of people who have had them, and I've had, like I said, two definite ones where I know one of them, I was actually on that level of the edge where I was being brought back.
Mm.
And I think that, the first one I had, I don't know what was going on. Like I said, I was so unconscious. I was in the ICU. I do think it is really interesting, though, where both of them went in different directions. So I really question why that happened, and maybe if it was because of the way they both happened. One was an accidental, and one I actually did try to take my life, and it ended up in a really serious situation. So I don't know if maybe the fact that when I did that, and strangely, another kid from my school did it at the same time. I really did not know at all. I didn't know anything about him, and I didn't even hear about it until I went back to school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it is really, really odd that I had that experience because uh, he I didn't know who he was before that night or that day. I'm not really sure what it was because I was knocked out in an ICU. And I definitely think that it's strange how there was two different ways that I was good. There was two different paths, it seems, that I was going between the two. So when the self-inflicted path, it seemed like it was a very dark. It was nothing like when I accidentally almost died. And I think that's really interesting. Something that maybe there's different things. Maybe it's not always just one way. Maybe there are different things and come into the situation that make a choice in what happens to us. Maybe it just wasn't my time, and that was one reason why I was in a dark place in one time, and in this beautiful place and in the other time. I think it's interesting to contrast the two. So I can tell you about the first one and then the second one.
Yeah, the ancient wisdom teaches that what happens to you after you die is dependent upon your mindset at the time that you die. So, you
Right.
know, I don't know if you've ever thought
That
about
would be
that.
interesting too, because I was in a good place when I had the accidental issue, like near death, and then I was in such a bad place emotionally, physically. mentally, everything was in such a bad place when I went the first time.
Okay.
And that's when it was like the dark place that was around me. So that is interesting if it is our mindset it could influence everything. Maybe what we see, how we feel, what's going on with us. I definitely do know either way that there is something that is there. And like I said, in the second, when I accidentally almost died, that was the most beautiful time in my life ever.
Oh, cool.
I think that it's such a beautiful thing that I'm almost like I'm okay now if it happens. I'm not scared of death at all. Like if that's where it's gonna go, I want to go back there. It was such a beautiful thing. So it was like a rebirth almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of NDEers say that. Why don't you tell us some of the details about the first one as much as you want, or if you just want to give us a brief overview,
Okay.
and then go into the second one, and so we can see that kind of contrast and
Yeah, the contrast.
give us the details of that one too, and let's go from there. So,
Okay. So the first time I was 17 years old, I was young, and I was in a very, very bad place. Like I said, emotionally, mentally, and physically, I had been suffering from an eating disorder called anorexia nervosa for a few years. And I had been dating somebody who I was at my first love of my life, your high school sweetheart. And I think a lot of because I was adopted by my grandparents, so my background is like I have a lot of I have CPTSD, chronic PTSD. I didn't grow up with my birth mother. I never wanted to meet my birth father, and had I had a lot of trauma in my life, and I didn't realize how even young I was when I had this trauma going on. Um, and I do believe that my reaction to my boyfriend at the time leaving me and then cheating on me, it was such an overreaction for a 17-year-old, probably because I had such a fear of people leaving me. I was left by my birth mom when I was a baby multiple times, and I always had an intense fear of my grandparents leaving me when I was little. And I would have nightmares all the time of them, of me waking up and them not being there, or what happens if someone takes them away. When I was little, I was always having these nightmares. And so I think that feeling kind of carried into my relationship when I grew up. And so when I got that first, real relationship, and I was with this person a couple of years, and when you're a child, that's a big thing. And when you're, 15 and you meet, an 18-year-old and you fall in love, and then you're there, he's there for your sweet 16, and then your prom, you do think that you're gonna be together forever. That's young love. It's like
yeah.
Romeo and Juliet, and yeah. And so it basically really turned out that way for me on my side. But he didn't do anything, I did it. So when I was 17, he left for the military, and I thought we were going to carry on our relationship, and we were going back and forth with us. At 17, and he's in the military. He's stationed in someplace like Korea, and he's out with the guys. And it's a different life then for him. It's not, there's women over there, and he's in the army. So it was I just remember the choice of when he called me and told me he cheated on me. I i just like emotionally just was like so shocked. And maybe your first love, you don't know anything about, oh, life is going to go on, you're going to have 50 more million heartbreaks. To me, this was like the end of the world.
That's what.
uh it's just the frame of mind. And on top of that, I was really struggling with my eating disorder. And I had been hospitalized already with my eating disorder twice. I was ruining my senior year in high school. I had to stop cheerleading. I wasn't allowed to do anything that I was doing before because I was so underweight. And it just had taken over me. And then I think when that happened, the eating disorder flared so bad. And at some point, it's hard. It's everybody's eating disorders are different, but at that time, being so deep into the eating disorder, depression definitely follows you. And what I didn't realize was going on was like a dissociation type of thing, where when I was so depressed in school that year, I would just remember walking through the hallways and people saying, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I was just not even there. I was not feeling anything. I was just numb. So I remember one day I I decided that I just didn't I wasn't supposed to be born. Like maybe I'm not supposed to be here. And thought about it, and I thought, I can't get rid of what I'm doing, and I'm hurting the people I love. I'm hurting the two people that took me in and gave me everything I needed in life and saved my life. And I'm hurting them. My grandmother's crying. My grandfather's upset. They're worried I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm making their lives miserable. And so the only thought that I could have was I just step out of the picture, and then they be happy. They can get over it, and they can move on and be happier because I'm dragging them down with us. There's no meaning for me to be here. And I think that, the mind does trick, with depression, trauma, and the eating disorder. You are very malnourished on top of that. So your brain is not thinking correctly. I decided that I was going to take as many pills as possible when I got to school. And I don't know how I did this, but I talked two of my best friends into helping me out. I took, again, very dumb young kids. I don't think they really thought I was going to go ahead and do that much damage. I think that I thought this was going to be an easy thing. I was going to take pills and go to sleep and just never wake up. And then my grandparents can live a better life and without my stress. And so I figured, this is easy. This is going to be easy. And I wasn't scared at all. And I think that was part of the trauma too. I think that that was part of the numbing and the dissociation of the trauma, that I literally did not feel anything while I was going through this. I remember seeing my friend's face getting so nervous and worried. And I kept telling her, it's fine, it's fine. This is the way it's supposed to be. When I got to school, I had every single pill in the house. They had me on medication for my eating disorder. So I had a full bottle of those. I had my mother's pills. I had every single pill in the cabinet. I had 3 bottles of Tylenol. I had so much medication. And then I got my friend to bring in her parents' medications, which I don't even remember what they were. I know one of them was a sleeping medication. I was so young. I just didn't, I just figured you just take a bunch of pills and then go to sleep. So we got to the point where when the homeroom bell rang and everybody was going to their first class period, I remember just being so numb and her giving me the pills, and I was wearing a baggy sweater and I was shoving the pills like down my pants, the pill bottles down my pants everywhere I could, in my shirt, underneath my shirt, and I had layers on all the time. I was so thin that I could get away with wearing so many layers of stuff that you couldn't even see it, you know. And she had given me some pills, and then she got very nervous and said, I said, you need to stay by the bathroom and then keep throwing out the pills and putting them in the trash and putting the paper towels over them so people don't see them. So I went into the bathroom and I basically started downing the pills as fast as I could. I was going at such a rapid speed, and I remember my stomach actually hurting from how many I took. I remember probably 3/4 of the way through, I got a feeling where I was just like, oh God, I don't feel good. I really don't feel good. And then I kind of got a little nervous. And I do remember my friend at that time, she ran. She just ran down the school hallway. She was scared. She didn't, I don't think I think it just clicked in her mind at that
Yeah.
point, like what's going on. And at this time, I am so ready to go to sleep and just die. And I remember coming out of the stall, and some of them were coming up, and I'm trying to push them back in, and they tasted horrible. I'm washing out my mouth, and I often was allowed to get out of classes at that time because of my eating disorder. The school knew about it. Obviously, I was hospitalized throughout my senior school, so the nurse was very aware of it. And if I ever felt like I was tired or if I had been exhausted during gym class, I was supposed to sit at the nurse's station, and I could go lay down and take a nap when their gym class. And like I do remember like any type of like movement, anything like that. I was supposed to go down there during lunch. I was supposed to eat in the nurse's office so she could see me eat, write down what I ate, and then make sure I didn't go to the bathroom for a half an hour. And so I remember going down there and I looked at her and I said, I need to lay down. And then she said, okay, are you feeling okay? Do you want me to call your mom? And I said, no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm okay. I need to sleep. I need to sleep. And at this time, I am getting, my whole body feels like this very tingly, weird feeling. I'm really nauseous. My eyesight was blurry. And I went to lay down, and I remember I fell trying to get on the bed, and then I got back up, and then I heard my friends running into the nurse's station saying, she overdosed. And the nurse just going, what? And she had dug up all the pills out of the bathroom and brought them out to her to tell her because she felt so guilty about helping me. And she was like, she took all of these. And so the nurse ran into, you know, where I was laying down, and I had been halfway throwing up already, and I couldn't really hear right. and she was like, "Did you take these? Did you take these?" And she saw what was going on. She saw I was starting to vomit, and I just remember being 911 coming in, the ambulance people coming in and taking me. And then I remember when I got into the ambulance, I just, I was so, I couldn't hear anything really. And they kept saying, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. Can you throw up? Are you able to throw something up? Um, I remember them saying some stuff like that. And then I was just looking up at them. And I remember looking up at a lady, and at one point during the ambulance ride, she was feeling my pulse, and she looked up at the other guy, and she was like, and I knew at that point she's saying, I'm not going to make it. I'm doing it. I'm going. This is it. I'm going to go. I'm going to die. And I next thing I remember is being in a very cold room, my parents screaming outside of a door, black stuff that they had pushed down my body to bring up all the stuff that when people overdose, they give you this charcoal, and it's supposed to bring, the stuff up and then try to grab all that other stuff and take it up. I remember being covered in black and seeing my mom, and I just saw her crying, and I just kept saying, thinking to myself, just go to sleep, just go to sleep. And I remember the next thing I remember is a nurse was next to me here on, I was in a room on a bed. I knew I was in a room in a bed. I could kind of see where I was, but from two different angles. I could see it from my angle being like this, and then I could see almost from the side view, and I could see the nurse in the window, the ICU window. So I was unconscious, but I was able to see everything. My eyes were closed the whole time, but I was still able to see that. So there has to be something there where if you can see what's going on and your eyes are closed and you're unconscious, we have to have some type of a something, some type of our soul that is disattached at that point, looking at that stuff. How can you tell, you know?
Did you have
Um,
any did you have any sense that you were out of your body at that point?
I felt I didn't know, I knew I was in a bed and I knew there was a nurse there, but I didn't remember anything else. I didn't remember where I was. I didn't know where I was. I knew I was in a hospital room. I did not remember anything before. I didn't remember what had happened, what brought me in there. And all I remember is seeing a male nurse, and he was bending over and looking at me and then doing something. And I remember the window with people running back and forth and walking back and forth behind him. And that was the actual ICU window that they had. And I saw through, I don't know, it was a few days. It was 2 days I was unconscious. And I never saw my parents, even though they were there the whole time. My grandparents, I call them my parents. And I never heard them, I never saw them. It was all so strange, where at one point I actually did see the whole room and me on the bed. So at one point, it was like me. If you think about yourself being in a corner of a room, like, and above and looking down, and you're watching you, that's how I remember it being. So I definitely remember it was like the right side of the room, the corner, and I was looking down onto me. And I was there. I could feel myself being there. And then at the same time, once in a while I could see another nurse coming in, and I often saw the male nurse coming in. Then at one point, I remember I was out of my body, viewing my body. And I looked out the ICU window and saw I saw a guy that I know that was a senior who was friends with my ex, and he was running through, and I won't say name, so I'll just say Joseph. And so I seen this kid Joseph that I knew he had graduated with my ex 2 years ahead of me. I knew him very well from school, and I thought, oh, Joseph's here, and I was like, hmm. And he was running, and then I seen his mother, who I also know, and she was crying, and I mean, just screaming, and they were bringing in a boy. And at one point, I was actually over the boy on the bed, and I couldn't remember seeing his face, but I remember seeing curly brown hair, and I knew it was a boy. And I saw again, Joseph was over the bed, and he was crying and crying and crying, and the mother was crying and crying and crying. And all I saw was this brown curls. And the next thing I know that I remember was being in a very dark place. Uh, this was uh, this was like, if you imagine being dropped in a well almost, but not knowing you were dropped in a well, and your body just kind of hanging out in a dark well. And it's like the space, it's like just darkness is all around, and I'm just floating there, and I'm just hanging out there. And I know that that boy is down underneath me somewhere, and I hear a woman's voice, and I hear somebody saying stuff like, "Got to make the decision. He's got to make the decision. Someone's got to make the decision." And the voice was something like, it was in my head, but I could hear it from outside of my head. So like, it was like a loudspeaker was like in your head almost, but it was like I knew that the boy that was below me in the dark, in this dark area, I knew he could hear that too. And I knew at that point that he already was making a choice, like he was leaving where we were. And all of a sudden, I just felt like I was hanging in the air this whole time in this black area. And then I felt like being pushed up, like my body being like pushed up by like air, just like flying up. And then I do remember the next thing was when I woke up. That was I woke up and my parents were there. I remember not knowing what happened. I remember this doctor coming in, and he was asking me, "Do you know where you are? Do you know what happened?" And I was like, I thought I was dead. And he said, "You are one lucky girl. We almost lost you." And then I remember him telling my parents, "We're going to keep her in the ICU. She's not out of the woods yet." And I didn't know what that meant. And he said it was because of something with my liver. They didn't know if my liver was failing. And so they needed to make sure that that was going to start coming, like, I guess, getting better before they were going to put me down into a regular hospital. And at that point in time, sometime during the time I was waking up in the ICU, and my parents were there, the male nurse that I had seen earlier a couple of times came in, and I looked at him and I said, "Hi, I remember you." And he just kind of looked at me and went, "Huh?" And I said, "I remember you. You were right here at where you are right now, and you were doing something, and you were looking over me." And he was like, "I'm a nurse here. I'm one of your nurses." And I I just was like, "What in the world happened?" Like I couldn't understand it. And at that time, I was so scared that I was now going to die because now I didn't want to die. I saw what this was happening, it was doing to my mom and dad, and I was so terrified of being in pain, and I was so terrified of the hospital, and I just wanted to go home.
Yeah.
And they were at that point, saying, we're after my liver started bouncing back, they put me down on the regular floor, and then they came in and told me about going to another eating disorder center. And so I kind of just got myself into that mess. But it was a really strange thing that when I got out of school, when I got back to school, a friend of mine was talking and she said, "Oh my God, did you hear about Joseph's little brother, who was 1 year younger than me, who was 1 year below me at the time? So he would have been a junior. Did you hear about what happened to him?" And I said, "Who's that?" And she said, "You don't know who that is?" And then I said, "No." And she said, "He's the one that rides his bike all the time." And it was so odd because when I was over the boy's head, I remember seeing him ride a bike. And I remember the bicycle. I remember him like riding a bicycle. And she's like, "Oh yeah, he rode his bike home from school and shot himself in the head."
Oh, wow.
And she's like, "He was actually treated in the same like hospital where you were at." And I was like, "Oh my God, two of my friends are now in there." And I just thought it was really odd. Later on, it hit me. This was months and months and months later on when we were graduating. We were going through pictures of my friends at my friend's house, and she had a picture of Joseph's brother. And I said, "Him, who is that?" And she said, "That's who the boy was, that I saw." And it was the curly brown hair. And she said, "Oh yeah, well, this is us like hanging out. I mean, we were really close friends." And she was telling me about him. And I said, I know his first name. I felt him. I felt him. I knew him. I was with him. I saw the mother. I saw, and I said, "Is that Joseph's brother?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I saw Joseph." And then I said, "How can I have seen him and his mother running through the window? And how could I have seen them out there crying at the nurse's station if I was unconscious and my eyes were closed and like I'm not looking out the window?" And that was all going on while I was out. So, one thing she had told me was that he rode his bike home, and I said, "Did he have a red bike?" And she said, "Yeah, that was his 10 speed. He rides it all the time." And I said, "This is I seen it. I saw it when I was with him. It was like flashes of what like who he was, and it was just tiny little bits of flashes that were coming back to me." I started telling her what the bike looked like, what he looked like, his hair. I started saying, I said his name actually first. And she was like, "I thought you said you didn't know who Joseph's brother was." And I've never seen him in my life, but I saw him in the hospital. And so I didn't ever say anything about the black tunnel again. And years later, I had went to a psychic center that is open during the summer months here. And I had been walking around, and a woman had asked me if I wanted a reading, and I didn't particularly believe in anything like this. It was a little creepy because she said this boy's name, and she said she felt something really hot to the head happen to him. And she said, he wants you to know that he chose the one way and he was hoping it would boost your soul up. And she said, that's a message I'm getting. But the way she said it, boost your soul up, she didn't know about the tunnel, like the darkness, and how my body was going upwards. And she said that like that. It was just very odd. I don't think that was coincidence.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that was the first time that happened. And it was a horrible choice that I made. I was in a really dark place at the time, and I was very young. I was very ignorant. And now I can understand why the suicide rates are so high for people in that age category, because we don't understand that what really can happen. I don't think we really grasp, the meaning of life and how precious life is. I just remember going out for my first walk when I was at home and just loving everything, like loving the trees, loving just looking at everything around me and feeling so lucky to be there. So I often do think about that boy. I've never had a dream about him. I've never had anything else happen. But it was stuff that I couldn't have known. Absolutely not. And I did feel him underneath me somewhat. I know that there was a voice. I don't know if he heard it. I don't know what happened. And it was like if I was saying it to myself, I have to make a choice. But I felt so confused while I was in there. I wasn't
Was
worried. I didn't feel anything, but I didn't know where was, and I didn't know what was happening to me.
what was the choice to was that the choice to come back or not? Was that what you're talking about there? Or
I do believe that that was either that or when I was maybe when I was over him, and I do definitely feel I was in his room at one point over him. And I might have heard them saying, you have to make the choice to unplug him because he was on life support. So it could have been that I actually heard them, the doctor, saying, you have to make that choice, you have to make that choice. And it might have been about him.
hmm,
Uh, or it could have been me. I had to make that choice, but I didn't make a choice. I really do believe I overheard the doctor saying to the mother, you have to make that choice. I
okay.
remember hearing her crying and wailing. And my heart was like, at that point, my heart just was like aching for her. I felt so bad for this woman. And I wanted to say something, but I knew I couldn't. I knew that there was no way I could. For some reason, I knew I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what form I was in. I knew that they couldn't see me. I just knew that. But I did when I saw the nurse, it was weird that I thought I was saying like hi to him, and he wasn't responding back to me. He was just doing the thing. And that's when I was out. So I do believe that I was maybe in that room with him. But the psychic, when I went to the psychic, she had said, we were tangled, and at some point he he was already gone, and he didn't want you to go. He knew you were intermingled with him somewhere, and he did not want you to die. So it was almost like he was like making that choice for me. And then I got pulled up by this like air. I don't know. And it's odd that,
So you came back with a renewed love for life.
mhm. And I started really working on my eating disorder at that point. I knew I didn't want to live the life that I had been living the last couple of years. I didn't even give a hoot about this guy that I was engaged to. I didn't care. I
Yeah.
didn't I had no, I couldn't have cared at all anymore about him. I couldn't believe that, and I truly don't even think I did it over him. I think I did it over the feeling of being abandoned. And I was so upset by that. And that's what triggered the severe, I think it was like a complex PTSD response, where you're already depressed, you have that eating disorder already going, and then on top of that you have like that dissociation issue where you're in a depressive state, so it's almost like you're not in your body when you're in that depressive state. So even the year before that, I don't remember. I remember just going through life, just not even being there.
Just kind of going through the motions, huh?
Right. And I remember, I remember when I got super thin at one point, and I remember going to sleep every night, and I hope I don't wake up. I hope I don't wake up. I don't
Yeah.
want to wake up. But after that, it was just I couldn't believe that I actually went through that, and I put my parents through that. I never wanted that to happen again. And I never wanted to hurt them. I never wanted to see them so hurt like that again and so scared. I realized how lucky I was. I realized when I heard the story of Joseph's brother about what was happening, he was so neglected and so abused by his father. There was bad, violent abuse going
Hmm.
on with him. His father was an alcoholic, and he had been beating him hard, like, I mean, really beating on this boy. And when I heard about that, I realized, oh my God, I am so lucky to have what I have. I could have been a dead baby by now. I know my grandparents didn't have to take me. They could have let CPS take me as a baby. They could have let somebody, my biological mom just drop me off somewhere and leave me there, and who knows, die, whatever, you know. And I was so lucky to have the life that I was given compared to what this boy went through. And then I'm putting my own body through stuff that it doesn't even need to be going through. And I felt so bad. And so, yeah, after that, it was like, I wanted to live so much more, even for him, because it was like, he definitely couldn't have that chance. What he did was not, there was no way he came back. He was coming back from that. He did shoot himself in the head,
Yeah.
so it was right away almost type of thing. But with his life, when I heard my friend talk about how bad he had it, I I was like, I want to live my life, and I want to definitely do it. I'm so lucky to be here, and I'm so lucky to have what I have. So
It
yeah,
gave you a whole new perspective on life.
it
Yeah.
did.
Trauma often does that, sifts out all the things that aren't important and gives you a perspective on the things that are sometimes.
It does. It definitely does. And during that time, this is in the late 90s. So we didn't even know about what trauma was. We didn't know about adoption trauma. We didn't know about what happens.
Yeah.
Um, you know, with the severance of the biological parents, when you're a neglected baby, when you're in a situation as a child, going back with the biological parent on and off, and that biological parent isn't very nice. And I did not have the abuse, obviously, that boy endured, but my biological mother did not like me. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So she saw me as a money ticket, and
Right.
so when I had to see her on and off until I was 12, and I begged my grandmother at that time while they were fighting. I begged her to let me stay there and not go back. And after 12, I was allowed. I remember the FBI at one point even coming to my house, and talking to me. And so I remember that that was probably traumatic. I didn't even realize that I had trauma.
Yeah. So, okay, jumping ahead now,
Hmm.
you've started working on putting your life together and trying to
Yep.
live and move forward and so
Hmm.
on. And
Yep.
give us a little lead up on into your next one.
So this is in my mid 20s, and I was graduating with my second bachelor's degree. And I had been wanting to do two different things. I had one bachelor's degree in social work psychology, but I wanted to do social work, and I wanted to go into eating disorder counseling.
Hmm.
Then there was something else that came up, which was health, wellness, and fitness, and being a nutritionist. And I thought I really would like that degree to add on to this degree, so I could have, them both. This way I could counsel, whichever way. At this point, I have a stable boyfriend. He's very good to me. I live on my own in an apartment, and I am working at a fitness club. And I was actually promoted as a manager at the club. So doing assessing people's fitness plans and nutrition plans, and at the gym. So basically, I was going out with my friends all the time. I was very happy. This was just before graduation. So I do remember being so worried about this paper that I needed to get. I had at this point, I already had a 4.0 average, and there
Wow.
was I wanted to be valedictorian. I wanted to get it so bad. And I was told there was somebody that I actually had a 4.2, but they can't count the two. And so then somebody said, well, this one boy has a 4.8. And I was like, what? And so I'm like, well, if you can't count the two, you can't count the eight, you can't count either one of them, then you have to choose somehow. So I remember that I really wanted to make this project and this paper the best thing that I could do. I really wanted to graduate. I wanted to graduate at the top of my class, which I did do, by the way.
Awesome.
um, even after what happened. So I am having, a little bit of stress over that. So I started having, panic attacks. I started having anxiety. I'm very nervous. I was still being in that perfectionist state of mind, where that kind of comes along with eating disorders too. When people have had eating disorders, they often are perfectionists, and it's a trait, and it's all or nothing. It's like a black and white thing.
Hmm.
Either you fail or you win, and you go all the way. There's no in between.
Yeah.
And so I was so worried about this paper, and I was on antidepressants at the time, and I was on an anti-anxiety medication for a while. And my doctor said at that point that I told him I can't sleep. I'm so like exhausted. So he wrote a prescription. It was for another sleep medication. When I went to the pharmacy, I remember going up to the pharmacist, and it was a pharmacy that I'd been using for 5 years because I was living in my apartment for 5 years at the time. So the pharmacist knew me very well, and he looked at the prescription and he said, I don't want to give you this. I'm having a little bit of reservations. I want to call your doctor and just make sure that he understands that there is a possible interaction here with the medications you're taking. And I was like, I'm yet that age again. You're not you're like, yeah, whatever. I just need some sleep. Just give me some sleep. So I'm waiting there, and my doctor okayed it and told him give me the medication. So I remember I went home, and that night I needed to get to I said to my I remember saying to my friends, this is an area of time where I'm working on this project and paper, and I'm setting limits for myself, the hours at the gym and no going out. And my boyfriend was actually, helping me with this. He was very supportive of this. And I told him, go home. I need some sleep. So you can't stay here tonight with me. You got to go. No snoring, no nothing. It's me and the cats. That's it. So I did take the medication, and I took my medication. I do remember, the pharmacist saying, if you feel too drowsy, call 911 right away. I'm very, nervous about giving you this, but I have to by law give it to you because your doctor's telling me to, even though I did explain the interaction. And so I had no worries in the world. I wanted some sleep. And when I went to go lay down, it still was not. I was so tired. My body was so tired, and my mind is still going about the paper.
Ah,
And so I get up and I took a couple Benadryl, knowing that people often take that to go to sleep too. I took one more anti-anxiety medication because I thought maybe I needed just to calm my anxiety down more. So the Benadryl would help me sleep, and maybe that sleeping med isn't working, and I think it just wasn't kicking in fully yet.
mm.
And so I used to sleep on my stomach. So I used to sleep like this on my stomach, or like on the side, like my head would be either this way on the pillow. I remember falling asleep and being on my pillow, and then all of a sudden everything hit at once.
Oh,
It was
ouch.
a feeling where I got scared, and I just went to pick my head up. I remember trying to pick my head up and I couldn't breathe. And I was like, and I kept saying, breathe, keep breathing, keep breathing, keep breathing. And it was so hard for me to breathe. This was just so suddenly. And it was terrifying me. I was terrified. I could not get air in. I could not get my body to move. I couldn't get my head up more. I'm thinking I have to call 911. I got to get to the telephone. Back in these days, again, we're talking, right before cell phones were a big thing. So I'm not really sure even if I had a cell phone yet. But I remember saying I need to get to I had the phone in the kitchen, and in my bedroom, and I'm saying I got to get up. I got to get to one of those phones, and I'm envisioning the phone, and I'm thinking I got to get up, get up, get up, wake up, get up, get up, and I'm trying to breathe, and I'm trying to breathe, and I could feel myself like I'm laying there, and I could feel my breath just getting like more like labored, like it was heavier, and it was harder to breathe, and then there was longer periods where I was breathing, and then I all of a sudden am in a hallway. I was not in my bed at all. I was in my high school hallway, and this is a hallway where it was by the gym, and it was my favorite place in the school to be because it was where cheerleading practice was there, and where we used to goof around a lot in this hallway. Sometimes we used to sneak out that hallway and cut class. So it was a favorite place of mine. So I remember being in the hallway, seeing the hallway, and going, "Oh, I'm in school." And I was back in high school. And I suddenly, my body was being pushed. Like when I told you about the pushing, like the air pushing my body up from the dark place, this was a push from behind. It was my body just like rapidly going. Shroom. I wasn't walking down this hallway, and the hallway was long. It was so much longer than I remember. It was long, and I just kept getting like pushed like this. It was like a, a air just pushing my body again. And it was a fun thing though. I was like, what's going on? And then I get to the end of this long hallway, and I kind of see the old area where you used to walk out the door there. And then I turn to my right. So a little bit about this here. A year before when this happened, my family had a huge loss, and we lost my cousin who was 19 years old to a car accident. I was still grieving him at the time. Everybody was definitely still grieving him. Of course, life does go on, after death, and people have schools and stuff like that. So, I still was having that grieving moment, and I was close to him. The last time I saw him was a couple of months before this, and he had stopped over at my apartment and helped me push something up. A long story. And when I was pushed down this hallway, I turned around and I seen a bunch of people, and I knew these people. I knew all of them. When I remember the faces of the people I saw, I don't know who they are. I have no idea who they are. They were all different ages. I saw a lot of younger people, but there were some older people there too. And all of a sudden, I turned around and I looked down, and somebody said, there was a voice that said, "Put your jacket. We're going to put your jacket on the jacket, in the jacket holder area." And I looked down, and I had this cute little black dress on, like I was going out. I was like, "Oh, this is cute." And somebody took my jacket. My jacket was off suddenly and gone, and they were welcoming me into this party, and it looked almost like a bar, but a party. And then the only thing that I thought of was I knew all these people. They were saying hi to me. They were all happy. They were talking together. And so I figured, oh, there's a bar up there. I'm going to go get a drink. And so I walked up to the bar. But again, when I walked through the crowd, I couldn't feel my legs walking or just moving. And while I was moving, I was, looking at these people, and I still to this day remember some very specific faces. And I wish I knew why. Maybe if my brain had seen these people before and it filed it in my mind, or possibly they were, from the other side of something. I don't know. But I do remember specifically a redheaded male saying, "Oh my God, how are you?" And I was like, "I'm fine, I'm great." And then I went up to the bar, and I remember I was waiting for a shot, and I was looking around to see if I could buy somebody a shot. And when I looked to my left, all of a sudden, right in my face was my cousin. And it was as real as day. This was not a dream feeling. This did not look like when you dream about him. I dream about him once in a while. So like when you dream about a person, you're dreaming, little bits of them. This was not that. Like I said, when I talked to that guy, I remember that he had the red hair. I remember his eyelashes. I remember certain things about his freckles on his face. So I remember that man. And there was a couple other people that stood out. And so again, like when I saw my cousin, he was really right there. And I looked at him, I was like, oh my God. And I just flung my arms around him and hugged him and hugged him. And I felt him. I felt him. I I smelled like the smell of the cologne. I could smell that. And it was, a male you could smell a male cologne. I felt his hair on my when I went like this, and when I pulled back, and he had these beautiful, beautiful blue eyes. I looked at him, and he had little stubble, like he had his beard was growing out, and he hadn't shaved for a while. And I looked at him, and I grabbed his face like this, and I was like, where have you been? Everyone thinks you're dead. And he just looked at me, and it was odd. Throughout the whole thing, he smiled at me. He was like this. And, he's like, and his eyes, which looking at me, and I was like, I remember feeling the stubble on his skin when I had my hands on him. And I was like, what is wrong with you? And I said, oh my, the whole family is freaking out. This is some kind of sick joke. Oh my God, are you kidding? What is wrong with you? And I said, they really think you're dead. What you did to grandma is not forgivable. And I'm like, she's probably crying. She thinks you're dead. You better go tell them you're not dead. And he was smiling. He just kept smiling like this. And in his eyes, it was like he was telling me, it was talking to me, but he was not moving his mouth. But it was through his eyes, almost like a telekinesis, where I could read his thought, you know. And he said, he looked at me, and all of a sudden I seen a little bit of sadness in his eyes, like, no, I am dead. And then I realized it was a shock, and I was like, oh my God, you are dead. And then he kind of was like, and then he smiled again. And then all of a sudden I looked, and I stopped looking at him, and I looked, and there was a bright shining thing going on my left, where normally in that hallway a door would have been, the old school door. And so basically uh, I I looked at that area, and it was this beautiful, bright area, and warm, glowing and warm. And I just started moving right up to it. Like I just, my body was moving right there. And I wanted to go there. Whatever was there was something that I wanted. And when I got close enough to it where I knew I was in that, it felt so warm. It was the warmest. It was like a hug. If you had went through a horrific thing, and somebody that you loved, that you finally see, comes and hugs you, and it was like that feeling, was like a hug. It was just the most beautiful feeling that I've ever felt since then. And before then, I there's nothing to compare this feeling to. And looking back at him again, and he was smiling, and my cousin was smiling. I remember being in there, and I was moving a little bit more. All of a sudden, I turned around again to see him, and he was gone. And I was like, oh my God, where did he go? And I started panicking. I started thinking, where is he? And nobody was there. There was no bar. There was nothing there. And this felt so great. And I wanted to be there. But all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I have a paper I have to do. I have that paper. I have to do that paper. I've got to get that paper done. I have to get that paper done now. I have to go get that paper done. And I'm like, oh, I can't be here. And then I just remember being pushed so fast down back like turned around like I my body was like turned around and down that hallway I was being pushed so fast down there by like air again just you know and this was like a speed though like a crazy amount of speed I that literally I had been awake at some point after this. I was being taken in an ambulance. I had no idea what happened. They were very happy I was awake. What had happened was this was actually almost 2 days later after I took those medications. I call my mom and dad religiously. I call them every night of my life. There's unless I'm out of the was out of the country, I've always called my mother every single night to wish her good night and my father. And I usually will talk, multiple times on the phone with my mom. My grandma and I were super close. We're best friends at this point, and this was, teenage years are gone, and now we are like this. And so she knows everything about my life, everything. There's nothing she doesn't know. And she knew something wasn't wrong when I wasn't answering. My sister also said that she stopped over that night or that next day and was knocking on the door and calling me, and I wasn't answering. She was worried about it and that she had mentioned it to my grandmother that I usually would call her back and I'm not calling her back. My grandparents, they had both contacted my landlord who lived downstairs and he said, I have been really worried. She hasn't moved her car. And you have to move your car every night where we used to park. And I didn't. And I got a ticket. This is the first ticket in 5 years that I didn't move my car. And he had noticed that. He noticed I didn't take my garbage out. And he had called my name a couple of times, and there was silence. And he said it was very odd because the cats were meowing up at the door, and he's never heard that before. And I had a bunch of cats at the time. My boyfriend at the time could not get a hold of me. So at that time, my grandparents said, "Can you? Her car's there." He said, "My car's there. We don't know where I am." So he tried to get find the extra key to my apartment, and he couldn't find it. And so at that point, my dad and my mother went over, my grandparents, my dad and my mom. So I keep going back and forth and I don't want to lose track. I call them mom and dad, but they were my grandparents. So and my dad said, kick down the damn door. Kick it down. Kick it down. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. My sister knew something was wrong. She said she had this worst feeling. And then my landlord, he said, I knew something was wrong. It was way too quiet up there. You're not quiet up there. And yeah, a girl in her 20s, so with a bunch of college kids as friends. So, so I they had kicked the door. They made somebody come and actually help them get through the door and grab it open. And they had found me in my bed. I was barely breathing. and they called 911 and they had to take me down these huge stairs. I guess this is what I was told. I don't remember any of this part. And I just remember that I woke up in the hospital again, in a regular room this time, and my mom was so irate. And I was like, "What happened?" And she's like, "Why would you do this?" She thought that I had done it again. I
Ah,
had done something again, and I didn't. And it was very verified that the I definitely accidentally overdosed. I did not do anything on purpose. I didn't understand. Most people don't understand what even a Benadryl can do on top of sleeping meds.
yeah.
Especially when you're a tiny person like I am, and you've got these strong meds going on, and you don't understand half of the time medications, but as a young kid popping these medications that they're giving to you, you don't understand. Oh, this isn't working, I'm just going to take another one. I'm going to try this then if it's not going to work. You don't understand, they have a delayed reaction. You're not a full adult yet, even. And I don't believe 25-year-olds are even a full adult yet, you know. I do believe that their mind is still at that nothing's going to happen, I'm fine, I'm good. This is going to be safe, I just need to go to sleep. And so I I had told my mom when I got out of the hospital. They had said that my breathing was actually, when they found my position of my head, it was the last time I remembered, I was trying to pick up my head to get up and to get air. And I must have fell when I went out. I must have fell like this on my face. So the pillow was like pushed up like this. So I was only breathing through like one side of my nose, and my face was like pushed like this. So the airway was actually compressed even more, and you're on your stomach. So that's a really bad position to be
Yeah.
in if you need to breathe. You don't put babies on their stomach, and so that's they said that was part of it, where the airway was constricted the way my head was pushed into the pillow. So I had been there, knocked out, like pushed into a pillow, and on top of that, these medications were dropping my heart rate very, very low. And I don't know exactly how low. They said that it was barely, there at one point. When they had gotten me, it was a lot higher. So they knew that I was in that state for that long. It had to have gone a lot lower. Then when I had gotten out of the hospital, I'm getting better. Throughout a lot of my life, I have talked, especially with my mom, so much about this interaction I had with. I had told her. I told her exactly what happened, and she believed that there was no other explanation, but it was him. It was him. And I know it was him. I know that I felt him. This was not a dream. These people that were there that I interacted with, I don't know who they were, but I knew them. They knew who I was. They were there to greet me. They were welcoming me. And that area I was going to, whatever that was, if that is what happens when you are dying, or when you are at the end of life, or maybe you are dead for a few minutes or a minute or a couple seconds, you went and then something starts again, whatever happened while I was out, when I was in that light, it was the most beautiful thing. It's so beautiful that I feel crying when when you think about it. It was warm and I wanted to go so badly into there. I so badly wanted to go in there. And all I could think of in my head was home. This is where my home is. And I knew going there, I was going home. It was in my mind, the word home was in my mind. And when I had turned that last second time when I saw the last time I saw my cousin, his face, he was smiling and it was like, go ahead, you know? And he knew I wanted to go in there and he was okay with that. And then all of a sudden, like it just kind of his face kind of changed a little bit. And when I went and looked back and I looked back real quick again and he wasn't there, I got really upset. And suddenly my brain starts thinking of my school paper. I gotta go do my school paper. I gotta get this done. I have to go get this done. And that's when it kicked me out. And I did not want to be kicked out. I do believe that last look that my cousin gave me, he suddenly knew. It was almost like it was a happy to be there kind of thing. Then he kind of suddenly knew that look in his eyes, it changed, and
Yeah.
that's what made me nervous a little bit. Like something wasn't right now. Everything was great, and suddenly something's not right. And I wanted to go back in there, and then when I turned back and no one was there and he wasn't there, I started like freaking out, and this light just started, not being so warm. I didn't get to see the light anymore. All of a sudden, I'm turned away from the light and I'm being shoved at full high speed velocity down my high school hallway. So the light that was beautiful definitely kicked me out. It was a very it was that was a life changing thing too. I truly believe that I would have been able to go in there. Maybe it wasn't my time. Maybe that was when the EMTs got there. I don't know because you don't know the timelines. When you're out, and you're. I
Yeah.
don't know. You know, it's I could have been gone for a second and they could have brought me back, or I could have been going for a second and I started getting better. I don't know what happened. Who knows what happens, you know? Uh, but I know that that was the most beautiful thing I've ever known. And that is whatever that is, it's home.
Yeah. I've heard other people who've had NDEs describe that as home also, or uh, or
Really.
or unconditional love. I've listened to and read hundreds of NDE stories, and a lot of them describe that similarly.
It was you knew you wanted to be in there too. It was not like that darkness where you're kind of just like where I was floating in there, like what's going on.
Yeah.
This was I needed to get in there and get home. This was
Yeah.
home. It was so inviting. And when the reception that I got at this boat party, and maybe your brain at some point of your life makes up these things. So at that time, being a 25-year-old, what would have been a great reception would have been all my friends, around, or my big family being around and people being happy and the music in
Yeah.
the background, So that was, what we typically were doing on the weekends was going out in our big friend groups and meeting up. So it was
Yeah.
almost like, I always used to actually call my friends like my family because, I had a big family and, well, my grandparents had a big family. And then I only know a few of, my my aunts and uncles. So I don't really know the extended family very well. So my grandparents were basically my world. Um, and it was, I did not think about them at all. I wanted to go in there no matter what. And if I wanted to leave them to go in there for a home, or if I had a choice, I still would have went there. And that
Yeah.
says a lot because I lived my life for my grandparents to make them happy. I would have never done anything to hurt them or leave them or anything like that. If I would have had to make that choice again, I still would have won.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like that. The scene that you described was something that you were familiar with that, like you said, that it was a happy scene, familiar with at the time in your 20s, go to the bar and party and have a good time with everybody.
Yeah, it
And
was,
so,
and it was this big, huge welcome. And what was so strange is that I seen these faces that I still remember to this day. I don't know who these people were. I seen an older woman who had blonde hair. I saw a younger woman with long dark hair that was my age, and I remember thinking, she looks very out of place here. And she was kind of just sitting there like this, holding her hand. And everybody was talking through, they weren't moving their mouths, but I could understand what they were all saying.
telepathy,
So
yeah.
nobody was talking through their mouths. Like they were like, but
Telepathy,
I
yeah.
could, yes, yes, yeah. And
Yeah. A
yeah.
lot of people, a lot of people who've had NDEs describe they saw people and they knew them, but they didn't know them in
Mhm.
this life. But they knew they knew them
Right.
from somewhere, And so I don't know what your spiritual background or if you have a religious background, but some people would say that was your soul family, and some people say that if they were there long enough, they begin to remember, who they
Mhm.
were.
But
Even
I
they already
definitely,
they knew them, but they didn't know who they were right away. But as the longer they were there, they started they
but I knew them.
yeah.
And
So
they were they definitely knew me.
yeah.
And it was very odd because the young girl, like I said, that was with the dark long hair, she had looked indigenous. She looked like she wasn't even like from this modern time. So it was very odd that she didn't. I somehow knew she was not in this modern era.
Yeah. Are you familiar with you ever heard of Dr. Michael Newton?
No.
He wrote a couple of books called Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. He was a psychiatrist and he used to do regressions with people to get them to go back to their childhood to deal with childhood trauma.
Oh wow.
And that's fairly common in psychiatry, but of course he didn't believe in any of the woo-woo stuff, and so but
Right.
he had people slip into past lives, and he was fascinated with that. And then he had people
Hmm.
slip into in between lives. So and he talks a lot. He tells a lot of his regressions with people. They talk about soul families that go through many lives together. So I don't know if you believe in past lives or not, but
With the indigenous girl, my grandmother was insistent that she had a past life and that she had been an indigenous girl, and she knew the man that she was married to, and she had children. And she had said that she knows she lived as an indigenous woman before. She had a past life before, and I often think about that too. That came up over the years where that was really strange how she never told me that until much later. And
yeah,
one day she was telling me, I when we were talking about I think it was especially because I had friends, pass away throughout my life. Even when my cousin passed away, I had two good friends in a car accident at the same time, and it was just really a
That's
bad,
tough.
bad time. And so we often talked about it. My grandmother and I would spend hours on the phone together, hours and hours. And she was always like, I could never do this with anybody else. um, but when we were talking about it, one day she said, I know for a fact, I know for a fact, Angela, that I was an indigenous woman and I had long black hair and it was beautiful. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so weird. That was like the woman that I saw, and I just felt it was very odd. I felt like she was really out of place for this time,
Yeah.
and it was almost like she didn't belong here in this time. Um, and I don't know, who these people were, but what was the soul? So the Soul family, that is really interesting.
Yeah. You never heard that before?
No.
Yeah. So supposedly we have what we call soul families, and most of the people, if not all of them in your life, your friends, your family, your parents, and so on, are all part of your soul family. And we go through all these many lifetimes, and we switch roles. Sometimes you're the parent, sometimes you're the child, you're the sister, you're the, it's really, and some of the it agree. Some of the ancient wisdom agrees with this.
I can see like having past lives and then being reincarnated again with the people and being like a different, one of the different people that you know, like maybe people souls are clustered together
Yeah.
and like you said, they switch up. But for my mother to really, my grandmother really, and my grandmother had a lot of like a lot of instincts when it comes to things that were spiritual. She was very, very spiritual. She was very anti-church. She had I didn't even realize until I started my own trauma counseling how much trauma my grandmother had,
Yeah.
and she never knew she had trauma. They were living in the World War II era, and
Yeah.
I mean my grandfather too. He had. I can't believe how traumatized they were. That they were very strong. It was like had to be strong. But my mother, grandmother, like I said, grandmother, I call her mother.
Yeah.
She was very insistent on the indigenous thing. She knew that was that. One time, when a family member, his wife, my grandfather's brother, his wife had passed away, and we loved her. She was hilarious. The way I grew up was way different than most kids because of my situation. I think that my grandparents wanted to overindulge me a little bit because I didn't have my biological mom giving me that
Right.
love that you would question as a child, and why, what's wrong. And I think that between me growing up, even as a young kid, I didn't even know who my mom was because I was being raised by two different aunts at the time, and my mom, my grandma mom, and at her house, and then like I at one point I didn't. When I was young, I really didn't know who my parents were. I didn't know where my mother and father were. I didn't know why I didn't have a mom and dad. I only had a grandpa and grandma, and I remember seeing my biological mom just show up one day, at a Christmas event. And I just remember looking at her and my grandmother saying, that's your mother. And I,
Mm,
I was like so young, and I just was looking at her, and I had the worst feeling when I
mm,
was looking at her, and I knew automatically something's wrong. And I didn't want to go near her. He didn't make me go near her, and she didn't. It was odd because if a mother just saw her daughter for the first time in 4 or 5 years, and you don't think that you would want to see what they're like, that's your child. What it was, and she didn't come near me. She didn't come near me.
yeah.
I remember back that way, and then I do remember her coming back, and I was very young. And when my grandmother was saying I was going to start going over to her house, and I just felt this horrible feeling being around her when I was a little girl. And when I looked into her eyes one time, she was staring at me. She didn't know that I had caught her staring at me, and she has big brown, deep brown eyes, the same as my grandmother. But her eyes were so full of rage and like a jealousy, a spite, a hatred, and
Mm,
she was just staring at me, and I was terrified, terrified of those eyes. And I knew she was thinking bad things. She just was staring at me with so much disgust. And I think it was a lot because I do resemble my father, and that was the love of her life, and he left her, and I think that she blamed me. And she's definitely a narcissist, and she's got a lot of problems. So really sociopathic.
yeah.
But it was odd when my mother and I used to talk about her. And she'd be like, well, how do you feel about this and this and that? And she never really gave me that choice when I was little to ask me, how do you feel about going over there? How do you do that? It was just, you're going to go over there and have fun with her. And she had no idea how bad it was over there for me.
Yeah.
When I did tell her, what stuff was going on over there, that's when we got close. This woman in particular did not. This woman that my was married to my dad's brother. Now they used to come over for cards, and she was so funny. She used to actually make jokes. Like, she was off the rail. I was only 8 years old, and she was off the rail. She would swear. She was a retired biker woman
Oh, okay.
that was married to him. And she was so loud, but I loved her. She was so much fun. She would make jokes about my biological mother. And she would swear and be like, beep her, blah, 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 blah. And I would start laughing so hard. And my parents would look at her and say, would you stop saying those words in front of you? There's a child here. You see, I grew up as an adult. So I was a mini adult. So I grew up, because I was an only child. So I grew up as a mini adult. So I parented actually my grandparents even. I made sure that in the family, if something was going wrong, my grandmother did not hear of it. I would make sure that I did not want my parents angry about something or hearing something or this and that. I was very overprotective of them. So, and I think a lot of it too is it gave me an adult role. So I got to make a lot of those choices. So I got to stay up late with this woman and play cards. They drink, and um, and my dad would slip me some beer when I was 8, and so I thought I was an adult. Well, I grew very close with her. I used to love, even as a teenager, seeing her coming over. when she died, it was really hit us hard. One day I was in college and I remember the old telephones where you used to, the public phones, you used to put the quarter in and
Yeah.
then dial. The operator would say, "Hi, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Do you need, what's the number?" And then you would tell them, and then they would connect you. And then they would ask if you would take the phone call, and they'd say, "Okay." And then you could talk to them.
Yeah.
So I was in college and when she died, and I was, I had to stay late one night and I called my mom, this is when I was like 18, 19 years old. And I was still living with my mom and dad. So I had to let them know that I wasn't coming home till later. So they didn't worry. And I was always, like I said, I was always on top of that with them and didn't want them worrying. So I always let them know where I was. When I talk, now operators are given the job because their voice is pleasant. And that's one thing that I learned about that. That's really odd. With the woman that was the operator that answered that phone call, we both know was her, the woman that died, the one that we were close to. She had the gruffiest smoker's voice. She was very blunt and she was real. What do you want? Oh, shut up. And so this operator, when I said, can when she answered, she was said, what phone number you need? And I was like, and I said, Birdie? And she was like, what do you need? And I was like, oh my God, this sounds like her. And then I said my phone number. And then when my mom picked up the phone, she said, you want to take a phone call from this? Blah, 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 blah. And then she was like, yeah. And she said, fine. And then she put right through. But it was like a fine. It was not they don't even say that usually. They would just put you through. And
Yeah.
my mom said, Aunt Angelina, did we just speak with Bertie? And I said, I believe we did. She was very spiritually connected to things like that. And she picked up that stuff very much.
That's
So,
a
and
funny but cool story.
it
So,
is. And it was almost like she was saying she was okay. Like we felt we were grieving all that week. She had just died a week ago.
wow.
And my mom had been crying so bad. And I had been crying on and off. And, to hear her voice and then just to be able to laugh so hard because of that attitude.
Yeah.
And the gruffness and the bluntness of it. What do you want? You want this? All right. You want her? You want this person to come through or what? That was like the way it was, and no operator in the world would have ever done that before.
Wow.
And we know. As soon as I heard her, I was pretty, and my mom said the same thing. As soon as she hung up, it was a silence, and she said, "Ange, did we just talk to Bertie?" And I said, "I swear to God, we did." So we believed that that was her saying she was okay. And we felt instantly better after that.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Did you notice any spiritual gifts or enhancements when you after you came back, or just curious?
So I do believe that number one, my grandmother had it already. She was very into talking about things had happened to her that were really amazing in her life that you can't science doesn't it doesn't explain. She was in an earthquake when she was little, a very bad one, when the whole house collapsed and she was in the bed and she had those four bed stakes that were up and they both she when she was sleeping she dreamt there was four angels over her on each side of the bed, like each corner of the bed, and they were holding a sheet over her. And she was looking up at the pretty angels. She was a little girl at the time. She was looking up at all the pretty angels. And then when she woke up, she was seeing that they were trying to get her out of the earthquake. Her bed was up on the, like, just like hitting, like on, like it was on the rocks. And she was in the bed, not one scratch on her. And all four of those bed things were covering her.
Oh, wow.
So they were like right by her and they were not touching her. And she said when she was dreaming, she slept through the earthquake. And when
Ah,
she dreamt four angels were holding a sheet over her, and she believes she was protected.
yeah.
There's a lot of other things my mom has. We have a big connection with religion, but we actually had a very high up like there was royal family in our bloodline in Italy, and one of the first bishops that came here was related to us, and he created the girls' school here, but he was sent by the Pope himself. They, my mother, my grandmother, like I said, her family in Italy, they were very, very connected with, they called them blue bloods in Italy, they,
Right.
which is royalty.
Right.
So they definitely, she said they were very connected to the church, very close to the Catholic Church. And her father was to marry, fell in love with her mother. And when her mother was a Rosati, which it was a they were like the ones that were connected to the church. They were very high up. She was supposed to only marry another Catholic person, and he was supposed to be very high up in the church. So she was, you not marry a Catholic there. And so she fell in love with this man who was a writer and a poet, and he did not believe in religion. And back in this day, I mean, you're thinking this is like 1900s.
Yeah.
So this is a time where, where you have a ruling family that is, your ruling family is a royal family, and that is a church. So if you don't believe in that, a lot of people that they look down on them people.
Yeah.
And he was one of the people that spoke out against religion that was going on in in churches in that area.
Ah, he was a
And
heretic.
yeah, exactly. And he was a very well known author and everything, and poet. He was I got my piano from him. My ability to play piano was strange because my I heard piano, a song on the piano, and then I sat down on a piano and just started playing it when I was like not even four. So my
Wow.
mom automatically put me in Suzuki School of Music, and my she said her father did that when he was young with almost all instruments. He was able to just pick them up and play them. So he was very specially inclined to that. I was a writer. He was a writer. She said we were very alike. But the weird thing about the religious aspect of this is that he and my like her mother, they they fell in love. He was not okay with her parents. The family was absolutely like abominated. Then no, this is horrible. You cannot marry that man.
Yeah.
This is not below you. So he said, "Well, then I will leave the family for him." And so they gave him an option to go to a seminary school. I believe it's like called a seminary school, something where you would they sent him off to learn to become part of the Catholic Church, wanted him in position in the Catholic Church. So he had to go through like learning all of this, and this would take a year to do. So
Yeah.
she would have to wait a year for him to complete this. He said, whatever I do, I will do it for you. I love you so much. I will do this for you, even though it is against everything I believe in. And so, I guess not even a month later, he comes back and he takes her aside and they are mad. The family is absolutely angry. What are you doing here? You are not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be in there learning Catholic stuff. Go back. He took her aside and he said, I love you more than anything, and I would have done this for you. But what I have seen happen in there, I cannot take a part of. I cannot live knowing that I was a part of what I have seen in there. And he said, I can't do it. I will not do it. And it's up to you if you want to leave with me. I will never be a part of that church. What is going on in there it was the worst things I could have ever imagined. Don't know to this day. He never said, would not
What?
talk about it. And
Yeah.
so it was very odd. But he was very spiritual, so and
Yeah.
he so gave that to her. And so she kind of gave that to me. And I was when I came back the first time at 17, I started noticing that when I was little, I had what was called sleep paralysis a lot.
Mm.
Suddenly, I started having these dreams where I could actually like be in a friend's dream, and it
Hmm.
would happen once, maybe a year. So I was actually my best friend. I had a dream one day about her, and she was in the snow. Oddly, when this always happens, I'm in snow. I don't feel the
Hmm.
snow, but it's snowing.
That's interesting.
Yes, it is white. It's all white coming down. I remember walking up to her, and this is during a sleep paralysis dream. So I would remember walking up to her in my dream and I tapped her on the back, the shoulder, and she turned around and went, like, she was like, oh, whoa. And then she was like, don't do that. You scare me when you do that. And we start laughing. And I said, let's walk this way. And then I remember it being so snowy that we couldn't see anything. And then I started waking up out of the sleep paralysis. The next day in school, she goes, I had the weirdest dream about you. She goes, you scared me in my dream. And I said, what? And she goes, I could swear I felt you touch my shoulder in my dream. You scared me. I woke up in my dream. I woke up from like having a nightmare. You scared me. And I was like, oh my God, I did that. I touched her. But she actually told me, and I said, you're not going to believe this. And of course, she didn't. She was like, that can't happen. And I was like, it did, though. I also was able to dream about people before they got sick. And I would see them, oftentimes, I would see them. I did dream about a girl before she died. And I dreamt of her. Again, it was snow and I was walking behind her and my heart hurt so bad. I was like she was walking ahead of me and we were in a cemetery and she had stopped at a grave and I was wondering whose grave she was crying at. And this was a young girl and I had known her through school. She was crying over this grave and she laid her head down on the grave and was crying and I felt the pain that she had. So I literally felt that pain. It was almost like when I first went into the boys' room and heard the mother crying, and I felt that pain that she had, and when she was screaming, and I felt that pain, and that was very odd during the time when I overdosed. That when I was looking over the boy, the mother was screaming and Joseph was screaming and crying, and I felt really bad for them. Yeah, but this was also the same thing. I felt a heartbreak like nothing other. And I didn't really know this girl. I'd never spoke much to her except for maybe hi and bye when we passed each other. And we'd been friends when we were little. When she got up and left, all of a sudden she like kind of disappeared into the snow. And I walked up to see whose grave she was crying at, and it was her name.
Ah,
And I was, I woke up after that. About a month later, that girl died.
oh wow.
Yeah. And I have a lot of weird things that occur when, after that started happening, especially with the sleep paralysis, it started becoming like nonstop. And it happened again in my 20s even after the accidental overdose. I went through a period of sleep paralysis where I was seeing people. They were talking to me with their eyes. I was floating, be out of my body. And
Yeah.
I used to be so scared of it, but then I got so used to it to the point where now today I'm okay. I want to see who comes here. I want to see who's going to be here. I want to see who's going to be in my room.
Well, there's a whole community of people who go out of body regularly. Are you aware of that?
No, I feel like I am doing that. And sometimes I worry that I'm not going to get back in.
Yeah. Well,
um,
I was going to
it
say
feels so
that's
good, though. It really does feel amazing.
the
It feels good.
sleep paralysis is a prerequisite for going out of body for most people.
Well,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
I had it since I was a child. My
Yeah.
first one was probably about 6 years old. And I had a terrible hallucination with that. I had another one, I know, probably when I was about 14, 13, and then it went away for a while. And then again, after what happened, I had started having them before that, but it wasn't intense to where I could see things like that. I also saw this was something very, very strange. So I had a best friend. She had been talking to a guy I liked, and I had a dream where we were walking down a bridge where we often used to go and sit and hang out. And again, there's snow. Snow is coming down, but I'm not cold, not cold. And it snow's coming down. And she's ahead of me again, like, and all of a sudden, I like reach up to her and I'm about to like touch her like I touched my friend, right? And she turns around and looks at me. And the one thing that was very weird about this was when I was walking behind her, she was holding behind her back like this, like like holding this hand here. She had a long knife and she was walking like that. And when she turned around and she smiled a not a good smile, like it was didn't feel right. And I was very aware she had a knife behind her back. She said, "Oh yeah, hi." I can't remember what the conversation was. It was very brief, and I woke up again. I had been hanging out with her more, and I told her about that, and she said, "That's so weird." And as time is going on, I noticed she's talking to this guy an awful lot. When I'm talking to him, she'll just come up and go right in between us. And my mom had seen it happen. My mom took me aside once when they were both over hanging out, and she said, "I don't think that you should let this girl my best friend, I don't think you should let her be around you and him. When you and him have time together, you and him have time together, she needs to go home. And I, it was very stern, very stern. So, whatever my mother saw was like, she was not feeling this really good either. So I said, I could feel it. I feel it. And she said, I'm really upset because we've done a lot. And my parents did a lot for this girl, a lot. And so we didn't know she was kind of ditzy. So we didn't know she was just doing this to be ditzy and she didn't really understand that it's not good to do this,
Yeah.
or if she had an interest. And then I had another sleep paralysis dream where I was in my house, it was snowing in my house. I was out of my body, going into the going towards the front door, and somebody was at the front door, and I had to open the front door. The front door was open suddenly, and then all of a sudden, that same best friend was out there, and she said, "Can you come out and play?" Like when we were little, and I was like, "What? Why would she ask me? We're grown up now." And all of a sudden, I saw all these snakes all over her, and
Ooh.
she didn't even know they were there. And I could smell the reptile smell. I even had the smell of it.
Hmm.
I could smell the snakes. Like when this
Right.
when you hold like a snake, you can kind of smell a reptile smell or a lizard.
Hmm.
I could smell the snakes, and as they were going like around her, they were like leaving paths of blood,
Hmm.
and it was a horrifying like thing. And
That
I
sounds
was
like
just
it's
like,
right out of the
oh,
movies almost.
yeah. And it was like, it would have been that would have been a great like horror movie
Yeah.
scene. And I was like, no, I don't want to go out and play. And all of a sudden, I was back, into my body, and I was trying to wake up. Well, it ended up that the very next day, she did try to ask the guy out and tell him to break up with me for her.
Ah.
And he said, what's wrong with you? You're delusional. What I found out is that my mom sat down with me and she said, "Did you ever think about that dream with the knife behind her back, being that maybe she's going to stab you in the back?"
Yeah.
And I
It's
was like, wow.
very
And then
symbolic.
yeah. And when I looked up snakes one time years later about the symbolism of snakes,
Yeah.
and they can symbolize envy, jealousy
Yeah.
when they're running across a person. They can symbolize, what do you call it, like a kind of like a backstabbing type of thing too.
Yeah.
But
Snake in the grass, a cultural statement of somebody who's gonna backstab you as that person's a snake in the grass, You're
yeah,
gonna
and they
get
also have that thing about trusting the snake, the adage, they say a man comes across a snake, and the snake says, "Oh,
yeah.
can you pick me up?" And
Yeah.
he's like, "But aren't you got poison, aren't don't you bite and have poison?" And the snake's like, "Oh, but I won't do that. I just need, just trust me. I won't do that." And then in the end, he ends up biting him. After he gets him to where he goes, he bites him. And the guy is dying. And he says, "Why would you do that? I did all that for you." And he said, "It's in my nature. I'm a
Yeah.
snake."
I'm a snake. Yeah. Yeah. There's a
Yep.
few like that. I was going to tell you one more thing though. Don't ever worry about getting back to your body. All you got to do is just think about it.
Yeah. Really?
You can't get lost on the other side. So
That's, I would love to talk to you more sometime about sleep paralysis because I have them probably, I'd say about 5 times, 6 times a month. Sometimes I have them every night for weeks. Then they go away. But there's one parents died during my birthday. They actually spent my birthday with me during my sleep paralysis.
Mm.
And I felt like they were really there. I actually had my first birthday when they were gone. I was still really heartbroken. They had died 3 months apart. When my first birthday after their death came up, I didn't want to celebrate anything.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I fell asleep and I went into sleep paralysis, and all of a sudden I was on the floor next to a couch, and my dad was sitting there and my mom was sitting next to him, and my dad said, "Are you gonna cut the cake or what?" And that's exactly like my dad.
Yeah.
And I felt their presence, and I went to go get, the cake, and I brought it back and we ate some cake, and I was like, I'm so happy you guys are so I'm so happy you are guys, you're back and everything's gonna be okay. And then again, when I turned around to get a plate, I turned back, they were gone, and then I woke up from it.
Yeah. Well, they were probably really there. We're just, there's so much more going on than we think in our, in our societal or cultural understanding of things. So, and people are starting to wake up to that. That's one of the reasons I started this podcast, was to help bring more of that information more into the mainstream. So,
I would love to talk to you more. I would love to hear more about the sleep paralysis stuff because I have been searching for so many people that have it like I have it. And they're always like they're talking about astral projections and this and that. I
yeah,
don't know anything of what that is, but I do know I talk to people show up in my room and they talk through their eyes like all the time. I see people that I don't know, but I know who they are.
right, right. We can definitely do this again and talk about some stuff a lot more along those lines, and go from there. But it's been a pleasure talking to you. You have some really, you have a lot of stories to tell, I can tell. I appreciate it. Is there any last parting words you want to leave with the audience? Any positive message you want to leave with everybody?
I think that's near death experiences. If we have them, we're lucky to come back from them. But there's a reason that whatever is happening. Some path is set out for us already. We're fulfilling that somehow. Maybe it's a choice that we make. Maybe they know it's a choice that we have to make. I don't know what it is. I think that we're all helping each other. I believe even in the spirit world, I was helped and guided. I believe that I you know I think that we're all bound somehow. Um, you know, somehow our souls are all bound.
All connected, yeah.
Yeah, yep. So I think that it's a great thing to be able to have. It's horrible when people say, "Oh God, I had a near death experience." They say it so negatively. You got a second chance at life.
Yeah,
It may have traumatized you a little bit, yes, but you now know so much more, and whatever happened, it happened for a reason. On what
yeah.
happened, where you were, where you went.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to understand. Yeah, that life continues after the death of the body. It's not
Yes,
over, and
I
so
believe so.
that's a
Yep.
that's a great message. It's been a pleasure having you. I appreciate
Okay.
you coming on the show, Angelina.
Thank you for having me.